Check her bag right now. The ring is missing. Daniel Brooks' voice cut through the showroom like a blade. Every conversation stopped. Heads turned. Phones came up almost instantly. Under the soft glow of the glass cases, 100 curious eyes landed on Emily Carter. She stood behind the counter with both hands visible. Her posture was steady. Not defensive. Not panicked. Just still. And somehow that made the moment feel even heavier. Daniel stepped forward slowly, deliberately, placing himself between her and the exit like he had already decided the outcome. His polished shoes echoed against the marble floor as customers leaned in and whispers spread. She was the last one near the display, he said louder now. He wasn't just making an accusation. He was building a story. Fast, clean, convincing. And just like that, the mood in the room shifted. Not confusion anymore. Suspicion. All of it aimed directly at her. A security guard moved to the front doors and closed them with a soft but final click. The sound was quiet, but in that moment, it felt loud. Final. The whole store had turned into a stage, and Emily was standing at the center of it. Daniel gestured toward her bag. Go ahead, Emily. If you've got nothing to hide. His tone was calm on the surface, but it was calculated. He was making compliance look reasonable and hesitation look like guilt. Around them, everything changed. Customers stopped browsing. Associates stopped working. The quiet hum of a luxury showroom was replaced by the electric charge of a public accusation unfolding in real time. Emily's fingers curled slightly at her sides, not in fear, but in control. As if she were measuring something no one else could see. Daniel kept going. This is a high-value piece. Over $12,000. And it doesn't just disappear. He said it with precision. Numbers made it real. Heavier. More serious. A woman near the display whispered, "That's felony territory." Another voice murmured, "She doesn't even look surprised." Piece by piece, the crowd was helping him shape the narrative without a single shred of proof. Then Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel private, while keeping it loud enough for others to hear. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. And for a brief second, almost invisible, his eyes flicked toward the ceiling, toward the cameras, then back to her. His confidence returned instantly, as if he already knew what those cameras would show. That detail hung in the air, small but sharp. Then Emily finally spoke. Her voice was calm, level, clear enough to cut through every whisper in the room. "You're sure you want to do this here?" It didn't sound like a defense. It sounded like a warning. But Daniel didn't pause. He didn't reconsider. From where he stood, everything was already moving in his favor. The crowd was primed. The story was set. The pressure was in place. He thought he was controlling every second of it. He had no idea that the same eyes watching her were about to turn on him. "Then play the full footage," Emily said. For a brief moment, the entire store seemed to hesitate, like even the moment itself didn't know which way it was going to break. Daniel's jaw tightened just enough for the people closest to him to notice. Then he forced a small laugh and shook his head. "Of course we will," he said louder now, reclaiming the floor. "Let us make this completely clear for everyone." That line landed exactly the way he wanted it to. Like certainty. Like exposure. Like he was doing the room a favor. Phones stayed raised. Customers leaned in even closer. Now this wasn't just an accusation. It was about to become proof. Or at least that's what everyone thought. Two associates moved toward the monitor mounted above the display cases. One of them hesitated for a split second and glanced at Emily, looking for something. Fear, panic, guilt. Anything that would confirm the story they'd been given. Emily gave them nothing. She didn't move. Shoulders relaxed. Hands visible. Eyes forward. But she wasn't watching the screen. She was watching Daniel. As if the answer wasn't in the footage. As if the answer was in him. Daniel stepped beside the monitor, placing himself where everyone could see him. One hand rested casually on the glass counter. Like this was routine. Like moments like this happened every day. "Go back 10 minutes, he instructed. The associate obeyed. The screen flickered. The timeline shifted. The video rewound through the ordinary rhythm of the store. Customers browsing, employees helping, everything looking normal. And that normalcy made what was coming feel even heavier. The footage slowed, then stopped. The display case came into view. Emily stepped into frame, adjusting the velvet tray. Her movements were precise, professional, routine. A murmur moved through the crowd. That's her. She's right there. The narrative tightened around her again. Daniel nodded slightly, not even looking at Emily. He didn't need to. The room was already doing the work for him. Keep watching, he said. And there was something in the way he said it. Something rehearsed. Like he had already seen this moment play out. Like he already knew exactly what came next. The footage continued. Emily stepped away from the case and moved out of frame. Immediately, people assumed the ring must have disappeared after that. Because the camera didn't follow her. It stayed fixed, static, limited. And limited angles hide things. Small things. Important things. Things that only matter if someone knows where to look. Then Emily spoke again. Not just that angle. This time, a few heads turned back toward her. Because that wasn't what someone guilty was supposed to say. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. For the first time, the certainty in the room cracked. Not enough to break, but enough to shift. Daniel's expression flickered. Quick, controlled. But there. Then he stepped closer to the screen. This is enough, he said. But this time, the words didn't land the way they had before. Because now there was something else in the room. Something quieter. Sharper. A question. And the crowd could feel it, even if they couldn't name it. Something about what they were seeing, and what they were not seeing no longer lined up. Then show the other angle, Emily said. Her voice carried this time, precise and controlled, leaving no room for interruption. The associate at the monitor hesitated and looked toward Daniel, waiting for direction. Up until now, every move had come from him. Every step had followed his lead. But now the control didn't feel as solid. And that hesitation was long enough for the crowd to notice. Long enough for doubt to begin threading itself into the tension. Someone near the back said, "Yeah, there has to be more than one camera." Another voice added, "Most stores have multiple angles." Simple statements. But they landed hard. Because they were true. And truth changes momentum. Slowly at first. Then all at once. Daniel forced another smile. But this one was thinner. Less natural. "That won't change anything," he said. But he answered too quickly. Like he was trying to shut a door that had already been opened. Emily didn't move. She didn't react. She just stood there, eyes steady, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment from the beginning. And that stillness began to feel different to the people watching. No longer suspicious, deliberate. The associate finally switched feeds. The screen flickered again. A second angle appeared, wider this time, showing more of the floor, more of the movement around the display. The room physically shifted. People leaned in. Phones adjusted to capture both screens. The footage rolled back again. This time, no one spoke. Now they weren't watching for confirmation. They were watching for contradiction. And that changed everything. The video began. Emily stepped into frame again, adjusting the tray exactly as before. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Then she stepped away. The case remained. The space stayed empty for a second. Quiet. Still. The kind of stillness that feels like it's hiding something just outside the frame. Then movement. Subtle. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. A figure entered from the opposite side. Not rushed. Not nervous. Just natural. Familiar. Someone who belonged there. Someone nobody had questioned because nobody had thought to. A few people leaned even closer. The figure approached the display case and rested a hand casually on the glass. The same way Daniel had been standing earlier. The same posture. The same confidence. For half a second, the room didn't react. Recognition takes time. The mind resists what it doesn't expect. Then someone whispered, "Wait." Another voice, sharper this time, "Is that him?" And the silence that followed wasn't confusion anymore. It was realization beginning to form. Slow, heavy, unavoidable. The figure turned just enough toward the camera, and the image became clear. Every eye in the room moved, not to the screen anymore, but to Daniel standing beneath it, because the man on the monitor and the man in front of them were the same. And for the first time since this began, no one was looking at Emily. The silence didn't break all at once. Fractured. A sharp inhale near the counter. A quiet no way from somewhere in the back. The soft shuffle of feet as people turned fully toward Daniel. They were no longer neutral observers. Now they were witnesses. The screen kept playing. Cold. Unemotional. Unbiased. It showed exactly what happened next. Daniel opened the case with practiced ease. He lifted the ring. Not hurried. Not shaky. Not accidental. Controlled. That detail mattered, because it didn't look like a mistake. It looked intentional. He glanced in the direction Emily had walked, making sure she was gone. Then he shifted his body slightly, just enough to block the view from one angle, but not enough to escape the second camera, now capturing everything. The room felt the change. This was no longer suspicion. This was clarity. This was evidence. Daniel himself didn't move. Not at first. As if staying still could somehow separate him from what everyone was watching. His hand remained on the counter. His posture froze somewhere between authority and exposure. And that stillness betrayed him more than any denial could have. Because confident people don't freeze. They act. They respond. They take control. He did none of that. The footage continued. He closed the case, adjusted the display, then slid the ring into a small drawer beneath the counter. A drawer no customer could reach. A drawer only someone with access would know. The crowd shifted again. Stronger this time. He took it. He set her up. Those words didn't need confirmation anymore. The room had already seen enough. One associate near the register slowly stepped back, eyes moving from the screen to Daniel, as if recalibrating everything they thought they knew about him. Then Daniel finally moved. Just a small step back. His eyes flicked up to the screen like he was seeing it for the first time. When he spoke, his voice had changed. It no longer commanded the room. It reached for it. That's not what it looks like. But the sentence felt thin the moment it left his mouth. Because everyone could see exactly what it looked like. And no one was looking to him for interpretation anymore. Emily, meanwhile, stayed exactly where she had been from the beginning. Calm. Silent. Her composure no longer looked suspicious. Now it looked deliberate. Like someone who had trusted the truth to speak for itself. And the phones that had been aimed at her just minutes earlier were now pointed in the opposite direction. At Daniel. At the screen. At the exact moment the story flipped. In that shift, quiet but absolute, the power in the room left him completely. Then open. The drawer. Someone in the crowd said. The line cut clean through the tension. And suddenly the room crossed a line. From watching to acting. From suspicion to consequence. Every eye turned back to Daniel. Not waiting for an explanation. Waiting for a response. And there is a difference between those two things. Daniel opened his mouth. Then closed it. The rhythm he had earlier was gone. Every option in front of him now led somewhere he didn't want to go. That hesitation was enough. Enough for the security guard near the door to step forward. Not aggressive. Not dramatic. Just present. Sir, we should verify the inventory. Neutral. Professional. Firm. And now that word verify had shifted too. It was no longer aimed at Emily. It was aimed at him. The associate behind the counter looked between them, as if still waiting for permission. But permission no longer seemed necessary, because authority in the room had already moved. And Daniel felt it. The loss of control. The eyes no longer following his lead. The silence no longer protecting him. That's not necessary, he said. But the force was gone. Because necessity was no longer his choice. It belonged to the room now. To the evidence. To what everyone had just watched. Emily still didn't push. Didn't demand. Didn't raise her voice. She simply stood there and let the moment unfold. And that restraint gave her more power than any argument could have. The associate reached slowly beneath the counter. Fingers touched the edge of the drawer, paused, and the entire store leaned in. Phones steady, breath held. Because this was no longer about accusation. This was about proof becoming physical. The drawer slid open. The sound was small, but in that silence it cut through everything. The associate looked inside, then froze, just for a fraction of a second, before lifting their eyes. And that look said it before anyone spoke. Someone whispered, "It's there." The words spread faster than any announcement could have, because they matched what everyone had already seen. The associate reached in carefully and lifted the ring into the bright display lights, caught every angle, every phone camera, every witness, and in that reflected light, the entire situation crystallized. This was no longer a story, no longer an accusation, no longer a claim. It was a sequence of actions, and every one of them led back to Daniel. He took another small step backward, as if distance might separate him from what had become undeniable. The security guard adjusted his stance, no longer guarding the exit, now watching Daniel. That one change marked the final transfer of control, because no one in that room was waiting for Daniel to explain what happened anymore. They were waiting to see what would happen to him next. "Call the owner," someone said. This time it wasn't a suggestion. It was expectation. Phones stayed raised. The weight in the room became final. Daniel's eyes moved quickly now, not searching for control, searching for escape, for anything that might shift the direction back in his favor. But there was nothing left to redirect. The evidence had already spoken in two forms, recorded and physical, and both pointed straight at him. The associate holding the ring lowered it slightly, but kept it visible. The security guard stepped closer, still not touching him, still calm, but making it clear that the roles in this room had changed. "Sir, we need to contact management." That word, management, carried more weight now than anything Daniel had said all night, because it implied oversight, accountability, a higher authority that did not depend on his version of events. Daniel straightened instinctively, trying to reach for the old tone, the old position. "I am management." But the line fell flat. No one reacted the way they would have just minutes earlier. Whatever authority had once backed those words was gone. Emily finally moved, just one step forward. Not dramatic, not aggressive, just enough to become impossible to ignore. And when she spoke, her voice held the same calm it had from the beginning. "You said we should make this clear for everyone." Now the line belonged to her, turned his own words against him, and the crowd felt it. One associate reached for the store phone behind the counter and began dialing without looking to Daniel for permission. Because permission was no longer his to give. That small action marked the final break. The call connected. A quiet explanation began. Words like incident, footage, verification. Each one built a new narrative. A real one, a grounded one. Not the story Daniel had created, but the truth that had been there the whole time. Daniel stood in the middle of it, silent now. No longer directing anything. No longer controlling anything. Just standing inside a situation that had moved beyond him. Phones continued recording from below. Cameras above continued recording from above. And between those two angles, this moment would not stay contained. When the associate ended the call and met the security guard's eyes with a small nod, the room understood without being told. This was no longer a question of what happened. Now it was a question of what would happen next. And for the first time, Daniel was not the one deciding. The wait was shorter than anyone expected, but it felt stretched. Every second carried weight. The front doors remained closed. The air stayed thick with quiet observation. Then the sound of the handle turning cut through it. Subtle, sharp. Everyone looked toward the entrance. A woman stepped in with measured urgency. Her heels clicked against the floor in a rhythm that wasn't rushed, but didn't hesitate either. Employees straightened the second they saw her. "Ms. Whitaker," someone whispered. The name moved through the room as fast as the accusation had earlier. But this time it carried authority that didn't need volume. Daniel shifted immediately, shoulders tightening, posture adjusting, trying to recover a role that had already slipped. "I can explain," he started. But the words didn't travel far. Because Ms. Whitaker didn't look at him first. She looked at the screen, then at the ring in the associate's hand, then finally at Emily. That order mattered, because it followed the truth, not the narrative. Only then did she turn to Daniel. And when she did, the silence sharpened. The room was waiting for one thing now, a decision. "Play it again," she said. Calm, precise, final. The footage ran once more. Not for discovery this time, for confirmation, for clarity, for the kind of review that removes every remaining doubt. No one spoke, not even Daniel. Each movement on the screen looked even clearer the second time. His hand, the ring, the drawer. And when it ended, the silence didn't linger. It resolved. Ms. Whitaker turned fully toward him. Her expression was composed, but firm. The kind of expression that doesn't ask questions it already knows the answer to. "Is there anything you would like to add?" The wording mattered, because she wasn't inviting explanation. She was inviting responsibility. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no narrative left to build. Only facts. Phones kept recording, because this was no longer just an incident inside a store. It had become something larger, something visible. Something that would not stay here. Emily stood quietly to the side now. No longer the center of suspicion, but no longer invisible either. Her presence was steady, grounded, like she had never needed to fight the accusation, only outlast it. Ms. Whitaker gave a small nod. Not dramatic, just decisive. "We will handle this immediately." That sentence carried the full weight of consequence. Not anger, not threat. Outcome. The security guard shifted again, this time clearly aligning with her instead of Daniel. And that made the change official, visible, complete. The man who had tried to control the story was now standing inside the result of it. "You said you trusted him." A customer's voice broke the silence. Not loud, but clear enough to carry. Now the crowd wasn't just watching. They were participating, drawing conclusions out loud. Connecting the pieces for themselves. Ms. Whitaker didn't react to the comment. Her eyes stayed on Daniel. Daniel tried again, voice lower now. "This is being taken out of context." But even he sounded like he knew how weak that line was. Context requires explanation. Explanation requires facts. And he had none. The associate holding the ring carefully placed it back onto the velvet tray. A simple act. Quiet, but final. The ring had returned to where it belonged. The false narrative had not. Another employee stepped toward the register and started pulling up internal logs. Deliberate, procedural, calm. No one was waiting for Daniel's instruction anymore. The system itself had already moved past him. That was the part he hadn't planned for. Not just the cameras, not just the drawer, but the moment when the structure around him would stop supporting him. And that realization finally showed. His posture changed again. Smaller now, less centered. As if the room itself had pushed him toward the edge. Phones kept recording. Some zoomed in. Some slowly panned across the store, capturing faces, reactions, the exact shift from accusation to exposure. And that was what made the moment powerful. Not just what happened, but how publicly it happened. How every step had been witnessed, documented, and shared in real time. And people were looking at Emily differently now. Not with suspicion, with recognition, even respect, as if they were recalibrating who she was based on what she had endured and how she had handled it. Then Ms. Whitaker spoke again. "We will be reviewing all internal records and forwarding this incident to the appropriate parties." That line carried weight beyond the room, beyond the store, beyond tonight. It pointed toward consequences that would not end when the doors reopened. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the exit, then back again, still calculating, still searching, but there was nowhere left to redirect this. The evidence had already escaped the room. It was in the phones, in the footage, in the witnesses. It had already moved beyond control. And that was the moment everyone understood. This would not be managed quietly. Not anymore. The story was no longer being written by the man who started it. It was being written by the truth that had been there all along, waiting to be seen. The room did not erupt. It settled, like everything had finally clicked into place. And that quiet carried more weight than any shouting ever could. Ms. Whitaker took one step closer to Daniel. Not rushed, not emotional, just deliberate. Then she spoke. "You are relieved of your position effective immediately." The words landed clean, final, leaving no room for interpretation. The security guard shifted into place, now clearly standing between Daniel and the rest of the store. Not threatening, just firm, marking a boundary that hadn't existed minutes earlier. Daniel stood there, shoulders tight, eyes searching for something that was no longer there. Authority, control, certainty, all of it gone in a matter of minutes, captured from every angle. One associate stepped forward with a device and began revoking his access. Keys, codes, permissions, everything that tied him to the system he once controlled. Each small action reinforced the same truth. This was over. Not privately, not quietly, in full view of everyone who had watched it unfold. Customers slowly lowered their phones. Not because the moment mattered less, because it had reached its ending. The full arc had completed itself right in front of them. Accusation, exposure, consequence. Emily still stood where she had been. But the space around her felt different now. No longer heavy, no longer isolating, open. As if the pressure that had been forced onto her had finally lifted. Ms. Whitaker turned to her. Her expression softened, just slightly, enough to acknowledge what Emily had endured. "You handled that with professionalism." Simple words, but they restored what had been questioned earlier. Not with emotion, with clarity. The associate behind the counter finished the system update and gave a small nod. Daniel no longer had a place here. When he finally moved toward the exit, guided but not forced, the eyes in the room followed him. Not with curiosity anymore, with final understanding. The understanding of how quickly a position can collapse when truth enters the frame. The door opened, then closed behind him, and the sound marked the end of something that had begun with a single accusation. Inside the store, the lights remained the same. The displays remained the same. The quiet returned. But nothing felt exactly as it had before, because everyone in that room knew they had just witnessed something rare. Not simply a lie exposed, not simply a mistake corrected, but an entire narrative reversed in real time. Emily lifted her eyes briefly toward the cameras overhead, then looked back at the room. Her expression was calm, unchanged, as if she had known from the very beginning that the truth did not need to be louder. It only needed to be seen.